A lot of people talking about going to the digitals, even the CBDCs, are not eliminating cash. They are just lowering the need for having the cash. However, in Norway, they are considered cashless because nobody carries it around. Nobody uses it. Doesn't mean you can't have it available though, but nobody uses it. So it's okay. It's non-existent.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome back to Wrestling Payments. Literally, we've just continuing to part 2 of the International Payments Alliance meeting by Nacha, because I don't think I didn't get through the one page of my notes so far. So let's keep going. When we last left, we were talking about the LEI and verification of ID and or receiver, if you will. You want any more to say on that?
I think we got enough on that. I know I will. I'm sure you will too. I know NEACH will probably be putting out some stuff to be able to help explain what that is, what to look at as far as what's coming. Can I give one of the biggest quotes that I got out of Payments Innovation Alliance that made me go, what? That it was this: Germany is getting rid of checks.
Yeah. And that's in the back of my mind while we're doing all this. It's how many banks are compared to how many banks in the US. Is it a couple of things, right? Is it easier with less institutions? Because checks have been around for hundreds of years. People are pretty attached to them. The other part, is it easier with less institutions? But is it easier when you can say, no more check? It's a mandate. We don't do mandates a lot here in the US. We do laws, and we pass things like, what was the most
we pass
recent?
regulations, rules, and all that. I actually say we do recommendulations. We make recommendations that get treated like the regulations, but they're really not.
Yeah. The thing I lost was the Dodd-Frank part. Dodd-Frank, they stuffed a bunch of changes through at once as a reaction to things, as opposed to, I think it's a little different over there where, do we want pieces of paper flowing through the system? I, as an ACH guy, say no. But how do you say no? You, corporate treasurer, can no longer write those little pieces of paper.
Okay. The part 2 of that blew my mind was they said all but one of the use cases that they have found how checks are still used can be resolved with an instant payment or a recurring payment. So it basically a FedNow or RTP or an ACH, right? All but one. One was, because that one blew my mind. The one use case is for the situation.
It was something silly. Yeah.
It was silly. It's this. It's the one use case of what they can't solve for is when somebody sends a check hoping it won't be deposited.
Yes. Hard to solve for that one.
I was like, wait a minute, that's a real use case? And they were serious. There are, I guess, rebate type check situations, which I've actually seen before, to where these are checks that go out and people do hope that, hey, they never get cashed. They get the money back, which is a weird, unique use case that I never realized until that meeting in them talking about getting rid of checks, that it does also exist here in the US.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It does. Oh, absolutely. Yep. I remember, so I got a bunch of notes. This is the part of a meeting for me where it was really an alphabet soup of SEPA, ISO, Target 2, PSD3. So it seemed like a lot of, they're so used to speaking about these solutions that they're throwing out, like we do in our meeting, code word. And faster payment is certainly further along in these countries. I mean, they've probably been around for a decade or more. So it's not, I get the feeling in the US, they're still seeking the use cases for how do we switch to instant payments for payments we're making. And over there, it's everyday instant payments. Was it millions or billions of transactions a month?
For their instant payments, it's still in the millions, but they're reaching it higher. So they're at millions and millions though. Whereas we look at like RTP, which I would say is successful because it's millions per month now too, but they're more like millions per day.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny that you do mention that the different acronyms that were actually used too. And I thought that was great because if Dr. Mario Reichel, I have to look up his name, make sure I get it right. And I'm probably saying it wrong. I hope I'm not, Mario. If you're out there listening to this, he shared with me that there's actually a German word for having too many acronyms. It's called Akufai. I mean, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong too. I'm not a German guy. I've studied Spanish for years, but they actually have a word for having too many acronyms, which I thought was great because we suffer from that here too. But I bring that up because, Joe, if you recall, there was one point in time where they're talking about service providers. And I go, wait a minute, I'm confused because you're saying a service provider can do that and this and that and the other. And I'm going, no, you can't. And what it came to was there are all these different definitions, all these different acronyms that are out there, and they are actually slightly different in how they're used over, let's say, across the pond. So payment service provider was one of them. There's a lot of similarities, but there's, I guess you could call it capabilities that their service providers have that ours don't.
And remind me, I think I'm going to say this right, but remind me if it's not true. Their service providers are more regulated, if you will. They have responsibilities, and I think it's, probably using the wrong word here, a little loose here of who oversees or examines the service provider. And over there, they certainly get the keys to the kingdom, but then they have responsibility.
Well, here we have, and there's some great organizations out there even really that pay attention to this, but we have third-party service provider management requirements. We've got all kinds of rules that have been passed on managing your third-party service provider. We look at, say, Operating Circular 8. It does have a section specific for service providers, but overall it says the financial institution is going to be responsible for their service provider. And the section really says, hey, as a service provider, if you do anything that affects the financial institution, you have to let them know. There, it is more like the service provider signs up directly to work with the central bank, to be vetted by and approved by the different associations, organizations, and like I said, central banks that allow them to get their licensing to be able to proceed and move forward. And they have to do things and meet standards that I don't know if I want to say higher, but at least a different level than what service providers in the US have to do. Now, and I got to be careful. I am a service provider, but, and I know that a lot of it is different. And I do know there are some things that as a service provider, like with the FedNow service, that we have to be able to meet, with the RTP service that we do have to be able to meet, but it's just handled differently there because of the way it's looked at, I guess.
That's an interesting point but as we're talking, and feel free, we can cut this out if it's not a good question. That's because you're signing an agreement as a vendor, if you will, of a tie-in to a solution. Over there, it's more the licensing part, right? The regulator. So is FedNow a regulator of their stuff as well as a provider of their stuff?
No, see, I don't think so. I think it's a little different. This is opinion, of course, on my FedNow friends, if you're out there, because I look at, say, FedNow audit requirements. Okay, my personal opinion, they're kind of a joke. And the reason being is you're just meeting the assurance program, the Fed's assurance program, which doesn't go into detail, doesn't say, look at this type of stuff. It just says, make sure you're meeting our security requirements according to Operating Circular 1, 5, 8, whatever, right? And I believe, in my opinion, there should be more. And I know that over there, that is what they do have, is they have the higher requirements of you have to meet these and check off these different boxes versus here we just sign forms saying, hey, we know we're responsible. Yes, we're doing these things. But I mean, now that's the form. In all transparency, going a little bit down the rabbit hole here, FedNow and RTP do have high requirements for what service providers are required to do to meet their connections. Yeah, I mean, as far as how long they have to be on, the levels of security that have to be on there, and the different checks. So I don't want anybody thinking out there, oh man, the U.S. is really lackadaisical on this. They're not. We just approach it in a different way.
But the difference still is you have, in one case, it's a relationship between a provider of a service and a vendor in that service, as opposed to a regulator of an entity.
That would be.
As I'm moving through my book, my next page, was on the digital euro.
Oh.
So if you aren't aware, and forgive me, I don't know where these rules came from, but the Payments Alliance follows Chatham House rules, which means you can say what happened at the meeting, but you can't attribute it to anyone. So no one, we gave David that quote. I think David probably said that
I
quote.
think, yeah, I mean, I've been mindful of that. Like you mentioned Dr. Mario, I think he would be okay with I said that. Whereas there's some other thing, especially getting the digital euro, I'm not going to say names or opinions on that one. I'm like, I want to load.
But if you ever had a meeting, a session, a town hall on something that touched a central bank digital currency, and it tends to get a little bit heated, there was heat. There was controversy. There was energetic discussion around the digital euro. And I think it goes back to the same issues, right? The privacy issue, I think a little fear of technology for me, as far as if it's literally not a piece of paper anymore. And there was a lot of great discussion about those folks have been around in banking for a while. And ACH, right? Is that digital money, right? Because paper never flows. It really just balances. There are those folks that would argue that digital money is already around because money's moving and transferring from institution to institution, from an account to account, never existing as a piece of paper. So there's that argument, which I appreciate. I could argue, I could jump in that bandwagon. But this was the whole idea of they didn't introduce it as a CDBC, but at the end of the day, it's a CDBC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That was fun.
Well, what was fun too is we just talking about a PSP there. It would be distributed by a PSP there.
Wow, exactly. Imagine that your favorite third-party service provider actually maintaining those currency, real current. I mean, like a bank vault, they would have a grouping of whatever digital currency they received for whatever they were already doing and get redistributed. It's for me, it becomes that same conversation. Now, I did read recently, I don't know where I read it, but it was a headline somewhere that said, as you look globally, lots of central banks are really hot on this central bank digital currency idea. But when you sit in a room and talk about it, there's a lot of but. So, thoughts?
Oh, this is going to be a hot topic for decades to come. And I said decades because though it is moving forward in some countries, others, it's not moving as fast as people think. The Asian markets are definitely adopting this philosophy a lot more. The government-controlled banks, like say China, absolutely going that route. But the more free markets, let's say, no. I mean, I think in the US, we are far from seeing it. My opinion too, I don't think we need it. FedNow solves for what a digital currency would do anyway, without having to have the same level of information that maybe we don't need to look at, in my opinion. Now, the way they're talking about it there, though, is it is moving forward faster than, of course, what we're seeing here in the US. And they're looking at the end of this year to be able to start releasing more on this is what to expect. People I've talked to, no names are going to be saying here, said it's going to happen. It's just a matter of the when and how. And it's also the when is within the next couple of years, is what I'm hearing from my sources over there. So that's mind blowing to hear too. But there are a lot of issues that as they're doing this the right way too. I mean, I got to say that they're doing this the right way. Multiple groups, multiple organizations are involved. Everybody does have a say. So lots of research is being done. Lots of discussions like the one we had are happening too, that they are uncovering, hey, this would be an issue. This is how we resolve it type situations. But I wrote actually in my notes that look at November 23 to 25 is where we're at right now. Which is they're going to be going into that phase 2, the preparation state, and prepping for it to actually be in place. So come the end of this year, we should be able to see more on, hey, what's happening and how's it going to move forward. But we also heard sources who can't be disclosed that it may slow down some while they have identified some of these issues and find the right solutions to solve for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I don't think it was much different than a digital CBDC meeting here. The note that I did, like at this point, I realized my mistake. I was writing my notes, and that means I need to rewrite my note. But so one of the things that caught my eye is stablecoins are regulated.
You got to read this.
Stablecoins are already regulated in EU, which I think there's a lot of proposals in the US, but I don't think we've reached the stablecoin is regulated in the US.
We've had a lot of things come out from different organizations. It's a couple different letters. I know FDIC's put out some stuff. There, though, they have MICA. MICA is actually the Marketing and Crypto Association. I thought that was, whoa. And they have come out and said, hey, here are some things to know about dealing with stablecoins, cryptocurrency type situations to where there are higher levels of requirements in place.
We should figure out how to share notes because literally we have the same notes. I have MICA right here. I was like,
well,
and I was going to ask,
I would beside you copying your notes.
Sure. The other note I have here is Bundesbank, which you had to learn how to say different institution names, has 4 versions of the digital euro. Do you recall that note?
I recall what it was. I understood it to be more like a use case. So I was wondering in that, I got a little confused because I was wondering in that discussion, are we talking about 4 different versions? Are we talking about use cases? Was that one that things got lost in translation? A quick note on the Payments Innovation Alliance International meeting. It's all in English, but not everybody there is a native English speaker. So that should be noted, but it's 100% in English, 100%. You don't need an interpreter, anything like that to be able to talk to these people from the different countries. However, I mean, it happens in the US too. We start saying things like, is that a soda, a Coke, or a pop? And so there was some of that would happen. And if you weren't a native English speaker, I felt like maybe it's getting lost in translation. So I could be wrong, but I felt like they were looking at and discussing more how this would be used versus the different versions. But I think what it was is there were different versions for the different use cases.
Yeah. And again, this is being in the Payments Alliance for a long time. These are not conferences. These are not, you go, you listen to a session and you go to the next room. These are intended to be conversations and interactive. And this was, and this is why we maybe, because I remember seeing some slides in the presented slides. You didn't get to the slides because the conversation immediately talked about privacy. Let's talk about privacy when we went off on a spiral. It was great.
Well, and you're right, though. I mean, I can't talk good enough about Payments Innovation Alliance. I've recommended it to people for years. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary this October for the Denver meeting. People sign up. You want to be able to learn this stuff, sign up. If you're afraid that Joe and I are going to out you on a podcast, again, we will not bring up anybody's name, anything that shouldn't be brought up outside of the meeting. It is, and it's where I go to learn. It's where I've gone for decades now, I can say, to be able to learn because you get the top of professionals in the industry, we can say around the globe, to be able to come and help educate you.
And we are not being paid by the Payments Innovation Alliance to say all these things.
Many people, if I pushed over to Payments Innovation Alliance, I'd be going free for the rest of my life. You know, back to Digital Euro, one of the things that ended up being its own session too, that I found fascinating and didn't realize as much was offline payment. Now, when you say offline payment, it kind of needs to be defined, and it is basically an instant payment made when the instant payment service isn't available. Wait, what? Okay, how do you do that? And they explained it would be like a card or similar to what we see with cards. It would be the storing of the information to be able to process it later. It would be for people who maybe don't have a phone and don't have a way of doing their own instant payment. It was, that in itself was like, wow. Like I'm going to get with one of the speakers there who's an expert on that because I got to learn more.
My expectation and blowing away your expectations. When I thought of an offline payment, look at the session title and you go, wonder what that's about. I imagine cash over a counter, definitely different and really valuable presentation. Way more. I expected to have a little mental break at that point. It was a great
Catch
session.
up on email. I'll be
Yeah.
fully transparent. There's rarely a conference you can go to or a meeting, and this is definitely the exception, to where every single topic is something that I'm going to pay heavy attention to. So every now and then I'm just like, okay, I mean, a lot of us, I got to be able to make sure, hey, this gets taken care of. I didn't touch my email, didn't get even close to it.
Yeah. The whole idea that you're going to get work done while you're in not happening.
Well, and even in the operating payments, they talk about Norway's cash list, but then brought up, but we had a problem one day. Where the system wasn't available for a little while. What do we do? How does that get resolved? So, I mean, that's one of the fears in going to all digital. Now it's all digital. A lot of people talking about going to the digitals, even the CBDCs, are not eliminating cash. They are just lowering the need for having the cash. However, in Norway, they are considered cashless because nobody carries it around. Nobody uses it. Doesn't mean you can't have it available though, but nobody uses it. So it's okay. It's non-existent.
I'm going to jump back for a second, but from an observation perspective. So I recently listened to a podcast, which was a commitment because the podcast name is Acquired, and they originally started out as talking about acquisitions that are happening in the different industries, but they've evolved into like full-fledged research papers on topics. And they recently did a 3-hour and 45-minute podcast on Visa. And that turned into really talking about the card industry and how cards work. I observed, and it wasn't necessarily in any session, but the idea that, and not to speak poorly of anyone or any system, but the idea that cards have not a monopoly, but they're the easiest way anywhere to make a retail payment or make a payment. And the idea that the companies that are running the card industry aren't necessarily EU companies. The problem is, how do we develop an alternative solution to a completely, and it's not embedded, it's dug in as the easiest way to make a payment is with a card. Is there an alternative way to make payment? And I say that because if we're done with the digital euro, again, a session that blew my mind was the UPI session. And I highly recommend, again, I'm paid by these guys, this Acquired episode on Visa was fascinating. And it was fascinating because, and I'll only pick on one piece. In a transaction, the only one that doesn't actually, I think, either pay or get payment is the consumer, the person using the card. So an acquiring bank, they get a piece of that payment. There's an incentive there for them to be an acquiring bank. There's an incentive to be a issuing bank. I got that, and this is in the back of my mind as I'm in this UPI session. They built, UPI is an India payment solution that is digital. And, you could imagine it today, me and Kevin create a digital payment system in the US. It is great. It will do everything you want it to do. Our adoption is going to be slow because we're just another solution in a world of solution. I got from this UPI that they built incentives in for the users, for the vendors, and adoption of it blew up. It didn't just, it blew up. Your impressions of UPI?
14 billion transactions in 1 month. All right.
Oh.
That just, now it wasn't at the beginning. In May of 2024, 14 billion transactions, billion, B. That,
with a B.
but
With the
okay,
B.
there's a lot of things in UPI now. I got to tell you, granted, the parent company of Pigeon is Vsoft, which is in India and in the US. So when it was UPI that really helped in the building of the Pigeon service that we learned from. So it wasn't my first exposure to it, but in seeing how well it was presented and getting more of the deeper details, there was some government intervention, full disclosure. Yes, we know that. But to see how well it's perceived by end users, that was phenomenal. To see the actual numbers, the use cases, that was phenomenal.
I mind you, this is at the end of an international trip with 2 days of hardcore learning. This was at the point where I started scraping things that I could remember off the top of the discussion. And the one part I scraped, and there was so much. Was there an incentive that if you signed up for UPI, you got free internet for a year?
I think there was one of those because there was other different types of incentives like that India's getting huge. I mean, 135 million people, more than the US. I mean, I get 1.35 billion. Let me get the numbers right here. So much bigger. There are also different sections, like our different states in the US, they do things differently. So there were different incentives that were offered from different regions, I want to say.
Right. But if compared to a card, no one's ever said, use this card and you'll get free internet for a year. So just that adoption.
I would argue because I'm a big guy on what cards I use because of the kickbacks I get on the points and how they're used. So, I mean, there's some incentives that come along with them, but it is different. It's from the card network. It's not from the payment network. That's the big differentiator.
And then one of the big differences here, which I think we're seeing in the US, was the whole idea that, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you can post a QR code and at the merchant, and in order to pay them, you scan the QR code, you say, pay them this amount, boop. And then on the merchant side, they see that you paid that amount. Happening.
Again, I've helped to build a system based off of that. We have that capability, and it is that exact reaction for me when I'm able to see it be used. It does take the network on both sides having that capability, though. So it is fascinating, though, when you see it used. The part that gets me with UPI that we don't see here in the US, though, is the fact that, Joe, I can send you money, but I can also text you within the UPI system about the money I sent you, or you could send me money back or information back. Hey, Joe, here's the money I owe you for lunch. And you can send a thank you back, and it's through the secure same channel.
That's fascinating. I will have another session on it someday, but there's this book out called Smart Instant Payments by some members of the Faster Payments Council. And I don't know if did you read it yet?
I may have read that. I might have wrote a chapter.
Oh, you were a writer of it. You know, I forgot about that. Reed's chapter, he's like in the beginning, and it's all about communication. Doesn't start off about payments. We are going to have a session I am going to have an episode on that.
I need to go grab the book. It's over there on my shelf, but there you go. You got it. Thank you for showing that.
Yeah. Thank you. We have did you hit number 1 yet? Because we certainly bought a quantity for our members here.
Did you? Awesome.
Oh yeah, we did. We bought a bunch. But so far, let me speak to the author and give you my real feedback. This is great. I just made it through I know we're off topic here. I just made it through the ISO chapter. And so many times you start an ISO conversation and you're off the cliff. People are in the depths. I would argue that if you were a student of payments with little to no understanding of ISO, this chapter gives you a great foundation. I haven't gotten to, what chapter are you in here? I didn't get to your chapter. What?
Yeah, I think you'll find I wrote the chapter on use cases.
I haven't gotten to use cases yet. I was so enamored with the ISO.
Well, I get that too. And I got to say, because I'm got to talk and work with people on that. I built the course on ISO where I do it as Neo from The Matrix to help explain. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos. They're most fun I've ever had with the course. I am really Neo. I'm asking you to pick which pill you want to take, but to be able to explain it because it's got to be done in a fun way. And I think the book did a great job of being able break it down, to give you that foundation. Or like when you mentioned Cindy earlier, hey, this is what you know, this is how you can relate it. ISO at first for me years ago was intimidating. But then I realized it's actually pretty simple. It just does complex things, but it's not as complicated as we make it out to be. Now, having said that, if you are a programmer, there's a lot more to learn for it. Okay.
I was just going to say that.
A payments geek like us who needs to understand its uses. Like, for example, when Nacha comes out with the faster payment certification, which also will be from the Faster Payments Council, they're doing that together. I believe there will be questions on ISO, and I'm not afraid of it. And I don't think anybody else should be after you read that chapter or go through my course, because you'll find it's not as complicated. I think it's easier than ACH formatting.
I don't know.
The light bulb goes off, at least.
Yes. So from an AAP perspective, I agree with you. I got to program this to work in a system that what I ask you, your version of it. I'll ask you later. I think I'm gonna have you and
I'll
Steve
get you
on.
access. You can see what I'm talking about.
All right. I think I'm gonna have Steve Wasserman wrote that chapter on ISO and the use cases when I get to it, because we have to promote the book where
I'm glad you are. It's a good book.
Oh yeah. 100%. I haven't, there's so much history, the read stuff through me, because I'm like, why am I talking about a printing press? Which brings us back to the UPI, a messaging included in the UPI system is fascinating. It's definitely something different. And from an adoption perspective it's huge. It's huge.
Okay. And another key to the adoption of UPI that people need to know about is it's also, you could call it a mega app. And what I mean by that, and it's something I don't think we'll see here in the US, is I can go over in India, I can get in an app that uses UPI for payments, and I can send you money, or I can receive money from you. But I can also pay my rent. I can pay my bills. I can buy tickets to a movie. I can buy dinner reservations. I can pay for a tax. I mean, you name it, you can pay for it, use it all in that app. So Uber built into your app, DoorDash built into your banking app. Imagine it that way. Fandango built into your banking app. All of it into one place instead of the separate apps like we experience here in the US is one of the key reasons why UPI is utilized and used so much.
Fascinating. I was, again, a session I thought, India, UPI, I think I heard something about that. Fantastic introduction. I've connected with the speaker on it. I think, so I don't know if we've reached another 30 minutes.
I'm not surprised.
Anything you want to say in closing? This will be part 2 of our Payments Alliance International Review. Anything you want to say in parting? Something we missed? Something to remember?
I think we nailed it all. I think we nailed enough that if you want to learn more, you need to sign up for Payments Innovation Alliance. You need to go ahead and use this podcast as your use case for why you should go to the international meeting and let your bosses watch it, because we're not giving you enough reason. I mean, I'm already anticipating next year, what are the things we're going to be able to learn? We already know in the US, when we put payments experts together, we're able to resolve issues. And Nacha does a great job of doing that. When we get to the level of going global, we are solving at a much higher scale. I know for me, I saw the solution to problems we haven't had yet, but I know we're going to have. So can't encourage you guys enough. Go out there while you're signing up for Nacha, that Smarter Instant Payments book that NEACH has got for you too. The Faster Payments Council, that's Reed, is also involved. It's another great area if you're working with payments to get involved with. Both of them, I highly recommend.
Yeah. And I'll just echo what Kevin said. I think this international meeting is really valuable because you do get outside of your thought process and say, oh, they had a problem and they solved it this well. I never thought of that solution. Really great people and great topic. And I know as a lifelong learner, I need to be shaken up once in a while. This was a great meeting. Great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Kevin.
On behalf of NEACH, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of NEACH.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.